In every search for someone who has vanished, there is a dreadful turning point. When hope dies and a terrible knowledge takes its place, it's the exact moment when whispers of evidence become an undeniable scream. It's when a search for a girl who failed to return from a night out morphs into something much grimmer and irreversible. In the Sian O'Callaghan case, that horrible moment was pinned to a specific location on a map. It had an exact timestamp, and it held the key to solving not just one brutal murder, but two. This is the account of a young woman who departed a nightclub in Swindon, England on a cold March evening in 2011 and was never seen alive again. It is also the story of a calculated stealthy killer who drove a taxi, melting seamlessly into a normal English town for years, and a detective, Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, who made a decision so legally fraught, it ended his career even while securing the only justice two families would ever find. The Sian O'Callaghan case did more than just solve a murder. It pushed an entire country to confront a question that has no simple answer. When the letter of the law and the spirit of justice are in conflict, which do you serve? Are you prepared for the most chilling stories Britain has to tell, announcing our brand new book, Unreal True Crime British Edition? 35 shocking true murder cases guaranteed to keep you captivated. It's available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or you can get your instant PDF download directly from our website. The links are waiting in the description below. Don't let this one pass you by. Grab your copy today, and now let us return to today's case. Sian Emma O'Callaghan came into the world on June 3, 1988, in Swindon, Wiltshire. To truly comprehend what was taken on the night she went missing, it is vital to know the woman she was. By every description from those who knew and adored her, she was a person who made others feel secure, tranquil, and protected. She never craved the center of attention. She simply approached every single day with a quiet reliability that individuals twice her age might covet. Her friends recalled her as a wonderful listener who brought a sense of order and peace to the lives she touched. She avoided drama and had a subtle sense of humor that surfaced only after you earned her trust. During her upbringing, Shin's entire world was defined by her family. Her mother, Elaine Pigford, and her siblings, Liam, Laura, and her younger brother, Aidan. Following her parents' separation, Sian instinctively assumed a guardian role over her younger brother, Aidan. Those familiar with the family characterized her as someone whose mere presence made everyone around her feel more grounded and secure. The sort of person who recognized what needed to be done and simply handled it without ever needing to be told. Her dreams were of the uncomplicated joys in life: a stable job, a place she could call her own, and eventually a family. By her early 20s, she had constructed a life of quiet dignity. Her career was in administration at a local company where she was recognized for her dependability and strong work ethic. She lived in a flat near the heart of Swindon with her boyfriend, Kevin Reap. At the sentencing in 2012, Kevin presented a statement for the official court record. In it, he painted a picture of a beautiful, cheerful spirit who could brighten the day of the gloomiest individual. That was the person known to everyone who loved her. To all who observed them, their shared existence seemed wonderfully solid and utterly safe. This pervasive sense of security is precisely what makes the subsequent events so profoundly shocking. Swindon was a town where everybody knew everybody. A young woman making her way home after an evening out was a sight no one would think twice about. It was just half a mile, a 10-minute walk. On Friday evening, March 18th, 2011, Sian was at Suju nightclub in central Swindon. The night was entirely ordinary music, conversation, and dancing. Surveillance video shows the group going inside just before the stroke of midnight. At 2:52 in the morning on Saturday, March 19th, Shin walked out of the Suju nightclub on her own. She let her friends know she intended to walk home. It was a distance of roughly 800 meters to the flat she shared with Kevin. This was just half a mile, a 10 or 15-minute stroll through a town she knew like the back of her hand. CCTV footage from the high street captured her walking. She made a turn at a corner and then she was gone. Not in a metaphorical sense, not in a dramatic way, just gone. There was no footage of her from the next camera, no trace of a struggle, and no witness who noticed anything. She simply vanished from view. One camera captured her image, the very next one did not. At 3:24 a.m., 32 minutes after she walked out of the club, a final signal pinged from Sian's mobile phone. Location data showed her phone was in the vicinity of Savernake Forest, approximately 12 miles east of Swindon. 12 miles in just 32 minutes. The implication of that detail is physically, mathematically, and horrifyingly clear. She did not get there on foot. She was moved in a vehicle. Someone had taken her. Just seconds after that last ping, the phone went dead forever. It would never again make or receive another call. Kevin Reap awoke in the night, saw that Sian was not home, and reasoned that she had simply stayed out later with her friends. Nothing in his experience with her had ever given him a reason to think otherwise. She was always dependable. She always made it home. He went back to sleep. By 9:45 the next morning, having heard nothing, he reached out to the police. Sian O'Callaghan was officially classified as a missing person. The Wiltshire police responded with urgency. A dedicated investigative unit was formed. CCTV from the high street was analyzed frame by painstaking frame, and confirmation of her disappearance came very quickly. Sian was seen on one camera approaching the corner, but then she failed to appear on the next one in line. The time between those 2 points was only a matter of seconds, and in those seconds, everything changed forever. That phone data pointing towards Savernake Forest wasn't merely a clue, it was a homing beacon. An individual driving a vehicle had to have intercepted Sian in that impossibly small window between one camera and the next. This was an act that was quick rehearsed and intentional. Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher took charge of the investigation. By midday on March 19th, a press conference was underway. In less than 24 hours, close to 400 volunteers had offered to join the search. Posters were put up all over town, a special tip line that was opened. A private donor put up £20,000 as a reward. Kevin Reap went on camera, his face etched with worry, begging for anyone with information to make themselves known. For 4 agonizing days, there was practically no evidence at all. There was just a gap in video footage and a mobile phone pinged 12 miles from where it was supposed to be. Then the case finally broke open. Detectives noticed a dark Toyota Avensis close to the spot where Sian was last seen at the approximate time she had departed the nightclub. The car was seen slowing down, stopping for a moment, and then continuing east. When detectives checked the license plate, it was registered to Christopher Halliwell, a 47-year-old man, a resident of Swindon, and a licensed taxi driver. On the surface, Halliwell showed no red flags at all. He lived with his partner and was raising 3 sons. His neighbors would have called him quiet, maybe even dependable, just a normal middle-aged guy who worked hard. That's what made the holes in his alibi so disturbing when the police brought him in for a chat. Security cameras placed his vehicle on the very same street Sian walked at the exact moment she was there. Yet his excuse was that he might have just been passing through. There wasn't a shred of direct evidence. They had to let him go, but a GPS device was covertly attached to his car. His phone calls were now being monitored, and round-the-clock surveillance was initiated. For a few days after being released, Halliwell's behavior seemed almost suspiciously normal. He drove familiar routes, made his usual stops, and gave them nothing to act on. Then on the morning of March 24th, 5 days after Sian's disappearance, he steered his car past the city limits and into a rural area with no surveillance cameras. He popped the trunk of his Toyota Avensis, pulled out the fabric seat covers, soaked them thoroughly in gasoline, and set them on fire. Hidden police cameras recorded every single second of the act. They captured the rising smoke and the man standing placidly beside his car, watching the evidence burn away. Whatever biological trace of Sian O'Callaghan those covers held was completely incinerated in a matter of minutes. He seemed entirely unhurried. He stayed until only ash remained on the ground. He was arrested a short time later in a supermarket parking lot where he claimed he was merely changing his car's upholstery. This is precisely the point where the Sian O'Callaghan case evolves into something much bigger than a murder investigation. This is where it sparked a national conversation about the nature of justice, the letter of the law, and the immense chasm that sometimes lies between them. The official procedure was perfectly clear: take the arrested suspect to the station, issue a formal caution, provide access to a lawyer, and conduct a recorded interview. These protections are in place because the process itself is considered as vital as the final outcome. It's a principle learned through hard experience by our legal system. Detective Steve Fulcher knew every bit of that, and he decided to go a different way. Instead of driving to the station, Fulcher drove him out to the hills near Oxford. There were no solicitors and no formal caution was issued under PACE. That's the Police and the Criminal Evidence Act. There was no recording equipment, just 2 men in a car and then walking on foot, simply talking. Fulcher's reasoning was driven by urgency and was in human terms completely understandable. Sian had been missing for 5 days. Until her body was found, the chance she could still be alive had to be treated as a reality. Every single minute wasted on procedural rules was a minute that could make all the difference. He didn't approach Halliwell as an interrogator, but as a man appealing to any shred of conscience that might be left. He didn't threaten him. He didn't make him any promises. He just asked one question: where is she? After hours of tense silence, Halliwell finally broke and said, "I'll take you." Just 3 words, but with them, the investigation was no longer about a missing woman. Christopher Halliwell led the police east of Swindon down narrow country roads that led toward a forest. He simply pointed at a section of ground located just off a rural lane. The forensic teams moved in without a moment's hesitation. The location was immediately cordoned off. Portable floodlights were brought in to illuminate the scene. The excavation started painstakingly slow as every inch of soil was carefully sifted. They eventually found a body partially wrapped in some kind of fabric. A post-mortem examination confirmed blunt force trauma to the back of the skull and multiple stab wounds to her torso. The assault had been sudden and quick with no signs of any sexual violence. During the trial, the judge's sentencing remarks would describe her as a happy, lively, and kind young woman. Sian O'Callaghan was 22 years old. In Swindon, mounds of flowers appeared at the Suju nightclub, where people lit candles in her honor. The same town that had rallied 400 volunteers to search for her now gathered together to grieve. And that is when Halliwell spoke once more. "There's another body." The investigators did not pause for a second. They immediately started searching the area nearby. Only a few hundred yards from where Sian was found, forensic teams discovered human bones and torn fragments of old clothing. DNA analysis soon confirmed the identity, Rebecca Godden-Edwards, known to friends as Becky, who had vanished from Swindon 8 years earlier in 2003. She had only been 20 years old. Becky's story was somehow the more difficult one to comprehend, not because it was worse, but because of how long her disappearance had been completely overlooked. She had struggled with a drug addiction, been in and out of treatment centers, and had at times been homeless. When she went missing, it was just assumed she had chosen to walk away. There was no major investigation launched, nor was there any national press coverage. Her mother, Karen Edwards, searched for years only to be told nothing more could be done. 8 years of not knowing 8 years with her daughter buried in the ground. The precise cause of Becky's death was impossible to determine from only her skeletal remains. Halliwell admitted that he was responsible for her death, but he claimed he was unable to remember any of the specific details. 2 women, 2 graves, and 1 man who drove his taxi along the very same streets that both of them had once considered home. This is the point where the case became as much about the fundamental framework of justice as it was about the actual crimes themselves. The information Halliwell gave Steve Fulcher in those hills was obtained without adhering to any of the protections that PACE demands. There was no lawyer, no formal caution, and no recording of the conversation. In the eyes of the law, that made the confession inadmissible. The way the evidence was gathered had been improper. And in the British legal system, proper procedure is not just some trivial detail. It is the very foundation of the law. The trial for Sian's murder went forward in 2012 at Bristol Crown Court. Halliwell first entered a plea of not guilty, only to reverse it later on. On October 19, 2012, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. The Court of Appeal would later refuse to increase that minimum sentence, but the case of Becky Godden-Edwards was an entirely different challenge. The confession that had guided the police to her body was obtained under the very same legally flawed circumstances. The Crown Prosecution Service was unable to use it. Her family, who had just found an answer after 8 years of painful uncertainty and learned that answer was a shallow grave, were forced to wait once more. Fulcher himself had to face formal misconduct proceedings which were brought by the IPCC. His choice to question Halliwell outside of a police station and without legal counsel present was officially found to be a violation of PACE. His career ended in disgrace, a misconduct charge, a forced resignation, and a new life in Somalia, running private security details. His case became a cautionary tale in British policing, a textbook example of what not to do. Yet the victim's family staunchly and publicly supported his every action. For Elaine Pigford, what Fulcher delivered was a truth the courts never could have provided. She finally knew the location of her daughter's body, a sentiment echoed by Karen Edwards. By 2016, prosecutors had built an entirely new case for Becky's murder, one that relied solely on independent physical proof. They had everything DNA analysis, forensic evidence from the gravesite, and expert testimony, making the confession totally unnecessary. On September 19, 2016, Halliwell received a whole life sentence for his crimes. He would never be eligible for parole and would have no minimum term. To this day, he is locked away, never once revealing why he took those lives. When the verdicts were read, the legal battles ended, and the headlines faded, only the human stories were left. Sian's mother, Elaine Pigford, channeled her grief into action, becoming a powerful advocate not for retribution, but for real reform. For years after her daughter was killed, she fought tirelessly for more stringent background checks on taxi and private hire operators. Her argument was simple: a licensed cabbie had weaponized his job to hunt for victims, proving the entire licensing system was broken. She transformed her loss into a cause, while Sian's boyfriend, Kevin Reap, mourned away from the cameras, the thought of him texting a phone that could never reply. Unaware that Sian was already lying 12 meters deep in a remote forest remains one of the case's most heart-wrenching details. After a single public appeal, he retreated from the spotlight because some sorrow was too profound for public display. Becky's mother, Karen Edwards, emerged as a leading figure following the tragedy. She demanded action when the investigation faltered and fought for years to see Halliwell prosecuted before the 2016 verdict was announced. Outside the courthouse, she reminded the world her daughter was a person, not a statistic, and defended Steve Fulcher, unequivocally stating that without him she would still be searching. This case forever scarred the town of Swindon and rewrote a chapter of British legal precedent, shattering a community's illusion of safety. The justice system had to reckon with the price of its own rules, while 2 families were granted a resolution that could never truly be called closure. Now, we will analyze this case from a forensic and psychological perspective. Who was Halliwell, and what do his patterns of behavior truly show? Furthermore, what does Fulcher's choice reveal about the immense psychological strain on homicide investigators? First, let's examine the organized controlled predator. In the field of forensic psychology, Halliwell perfectly fits the description of what experts term an organized and controlled offender. This type of criminal is characterized by meticulous planning, not by random chaos. The roughly 8-year gap between his known murders points to long periods of self-control or an undiscovered history of violence. His taxi provided him with a perfect cover story, granting him access to isolated, vulnerable people late at night. He disposed of his victims in secluded areas, all while leading a seemingly normal life with a partner, children, and a stable job. His neighbors never reported anything unusual, and his coworkers described him as a diligent employee. This complete lack of suspicion is the most telling psychological element. Halliwell wasn't some social outcast who gave people the creeps. He was utterly average, possessing the ability to project an ordinary facade while concealing an inner world of monstrous violence, which is a classic hallmark of a functioning psychopath. Second, the victimology reveals a deliberate pattern. Analyzing the differences between Sian O'Callaghan and Becky Godden Edwards is incredibly insightful from a forensic perspective. Sian had deep social roots, a steady job, a committed partner, and a wide circle of family and friends who would instantly notice her disappearance and demand answers. Becky, on the other hand, was far more susceptible. Her battles with addiction and episodes of being homeless allowed her absence to go unexplained for 8 long years. Choosing these two specific victims demonstrates a classic strategy observed time and again in predatory criminals. It involves targeting people traveling alone at night under conditions that make an immediate investigation highly unlikely. Seeing a cab stop for a young woman walking by herself at 2:52 in the morning doesn't raise any alarms, it's normal. And that very normality was his greatest weapon. Third, we have Steve Fulcher in The Psychology of Moral Imperative. Fulcher's professional censure was entirely correct, according to the law. The safeguards provided by PACE are crucial because a justice system allowing detectives to interrogate suspects without legal supervision invites dangers that are historically proven to be all too real. From a psychological viewpoint, however, his experience is a textbook case of what happens to emergency responders, a tunnel vision fueled by a desperate moral need, the conviction that a life hangs in the balance, and the immense pressure of a family's hope. These factors combine to create a situation where following the rules can seem like the most immoral choice of all. Fulcher didn't defy protocol because he disdained the law. He did it because he felt the result was more important than the process. He was correct about his discovery, but he was incorrect about how he was permitted to make it. Fourth, the enduring silence. Maybe the most unsettling aspect of this entire case is what Halliwell refuses to say, as he has provided no reason, no justification whatsoever. He admitted guilt only in very specific, carefully controlled admissions before withdrawing into a silence that remains absolute to this day. This kind of behavior is typical of offenders who gain a continuous sense of psychological power by refusing to give answers. The knowledge is his alone. Forcing the families to live without answers is a final, cruel exertion of power over them, and the chance of other victims has never been dismissed. This was a man who murdered twice across an 8-year span, and who was caught only because one detective spotted a car on a grainy security video. Statistically, a killer like him almost never stops at just 2 victims. The official review board's investigation into other potential leads highlights this very fear. Behind Christopher Halliwell's wall of silence, other families might be out there completely unaware. They are waiting for answers to questions they haven't even thought to ask. The Sian O'Callaghan case carved its name into the annals of modern British crime for reasons that went far beyond the horrific act itself. It was what the investigation unearthed that truly shook the nation. A monster who lived an ordinary life among us, and a legal framework that had to reckon with the terrible price of its own ideals. And an investigator who threw away his entire career just so a mother could know her daughter's final resting place, Sian O'Callaghan. The steady, reliable young woman whose boyfriend painted a picture in court of a vibrant, cheerful soul. Someone with a gift for brightening even the darkest of moods. She deserves to be more than just a file number in a notorious case. She was a real person who cherished life's simple joys and faced each day with a resilience that many twice her age could only admire. That was the woman she was, and that is how we should remember her always. If this story has affected you, and if you agree that the narratives of Sean and Becky must be handled with profound sensitivity, with meticulous accuracy, and the deep respect both women are due, please think about sharing this account with somebody who needs to hear it. What follows is a consolidated timeline of the crucial moments in the cases of Sian O'Callaghan and Becky Godden Edwards, from Shin's birth all the way to the ultimate court ruling. This should serve as a factual guide for anyone scripting, producing, or conducting further research into this case. Every date and fact presented has been confirmed using court records, official police statements, and established journalistic sources. June 3, 1988, Sian Emma O'Callaghan is born in Swindon, Wiltshire. 2003, 20-year-old Rebecca, known as Becky Godden Edwards, vanishes from Swindon and is officially recorded as a voluntary missing person. Her case prompts no significant police investigation at the time. Friday, March 18th, 2011, Sian, age 22, goes for a night out with friends at Suju, a nightclub in central Swindon. Sian departs from the club by herself, planning to make the roughly 800-meter walk home. Surveillance cameras record her walking along the high street. She rounds a corner, vanishing from the view of the next camera in the sequence. 9:45 a.m. March 19th. Her boyfriend Kevin Reap officially reports her missing to the Wiltshire Police the afternoon of March 19th. The inquiry is placed under the command of Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, who holds the initial press conference. Almost 400 volunteers join the search efforts within 24 hours. A reward of £20,000 is offered by an anonymous source for any information. March 20th to the 23rd. A thorough review of surveillance footage identifies a dark Toyota Avensis near the area around the time she vanished. It's registered to Christopher Halliwell, a 47-year-old licensed taxi driver living in Swindon. March 23rd. Halliwell is brought in for questioning, but his alibi contains inconsistencies. With no hard evidence against him, authorities are forced to let him go. A 24-hour covert surveillance operation is launched. Investigators plant a GPS tracker on his vehicle and begin monitoring his phone communications. On the morning of March 24th, Halliwell drives to a remote location. He takes the seat covers out of his car, soaks them with petrol, and sets them on fire. Officers film the entire incriminating sequence from a distance. Halliwell is arrested shortly thereafter in a supermarket car park, which leads to a highly controversial decision. Rather than transporting Halliwell directly to the police station for processing, Detective Fulcher drives him out to the hills just outside of Oxford. There is no lawyer present, no official caution is read, and nothing is recorded. An unconventional, off-the-books conversation between the two men continues for hours. March 24th, Halliwell finally breaks under the pressure. He tells Fulcher, "I'll take you," and agrees to lead police to where he left Sheen's body. The body of Sian O'Callaghan is located in a shallow grave, partially wrapped in some material. A post-mortem confirms she died from blunt force trauma and stab wounds. The examination shows no evidence of sexual assault. Later that same day comes a second discovery when Halliwell discloses another body is buried nearby. Skeletal remains are unearthed and are eventually identified through DNA as those of Becky Godden Edwards, the 20-year-old who had been missing since 2003. Halliwell confesses to being responsible for her death, but claims he is unable to remember any of the specific details. October 19th, 2012, at Bristol Crown Court. Halliwell enters a guilty plea for the murder of Sian O'Callaghan and receives a life sentence with a minimum of 25 years to be served. A subsequent appeal to increase his minimum term is rejected by the Court of Appeal. Between 2012 and 2013, the confession that led to both bodies is deemed inadmissible in court. As a result, the murder case for Becky Godden Edwards is unable to move forward. The IPCC initiates a formal inquiry into the conduct of Detective Fulcher. He is ultimately found guilty of gross misconduct and is compelled to resign from the force after more than 20 years of service. September 19th, 2016. A fresh trial for this murder of Becky Godden Edwards is constructed entirely on new physical and forensic evidence requiring no confession. Halliwell is convicted and handed a whole life order, meaning no parole and no minimum term. Halliwell continues to serve his sentence in prison. He has never offered a motive for either of the murders, and police have explored the potential for other victims. No final conclusion on that front has ever been reached. The IOPC has since released institutional training materials based on the case, which continues to be a landmark reference point in British legal and policing discussions. The story of Sian O'Callaghan is more than a tragic crime. It is a powerful reminder of how fragile life can be and how deeply our choices affect others. Behind every headline is a real person with dreams, a family with hope, and a future that deserved to unfold. Her story urges us to stay aware, to look out for one another, and to never ignore the importance of personal safety, even in ordinary moments. But beyond fear, there is also humanity. The dedication of investigators, the persistence of loved ones, and the collective demand for justice show the strength of compassion and community. Even in darkness, people chose to act, to care, and to seek truth. This story teaches us that awareness can save lives. Empathy can bring people together, and justice requires courage. It reminds us not to take a single moment for granted and to value the people around us more deeply. Most importantly, it calls on each of us to be more responsible, more attentive, and more human, because small actions can make the difference between safety and tragedy.